Welcome to the Home Like Stories channel. Don't forget to subscribe, it will be interesting. And we begin.
It was supposed to be a quick getaway. After years of grinding at his tech job in Seattle, Mark Grayson wanted nothing more than a break from the noise, the deadlines, and the endless hum of digital notifications. The Airbnb listing for Hollow Creek, a tiny village nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains, seemed like the perfect escape. The town's remoteness was both its charm and its enigma. With a population of fewer than 100 people, it had no cell phone service, no internet, and barely any visitors. The photos on the listing showcased serene woods, a quaint cabin, and a promise of absolute solitude. It was exactly what Mark needed. Driving through the winding roads, Mark felt the weight of the city lift from his shoulders. The dense forest surrounding Hollow Creek seemed alive, its towering pines and moss-covered oaks creating a canopy that blocked out the sun in patches. The GPS had lost signal miles ago, but the hand-drawn map provided by the cabin's host was surprisingly accurate. When Mark finally pulled up to the cabin, he was struck by its rustic beauty. The wooden structure was weathered but sturdy, its porch adorned with a pair of rocking chairs that seemed to beckon him. But as he unloaded his bags, he noticed something odd: the complete absence of sound. No birds, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive silence. That night, as Mark settled into the creaking bed, he couldn't shake a feeling of unease. The cabin's interior was cozy enough, with its stone fireplace and old-fashioned decor, but the silence was unnerving. He'd read about the silence of the wild, but this felt different. It wasn't just quiet, it was void. Around midnight, Mark was jolted awake by a sound. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but then he heard it again, a faint, rhythmic tapping. It seemed to come from outside the cabin, near the porch. His heart raced as he grabbed the flashlight from the bedside table and tiptoed to the window. Shining the beam onto the porch, he saw nothing but the two empty rocking chairs, swaying gently in a non-existent breeze. The next morning, Mark decided to venture into Hollow Creek proper. The town was little more than a few buildings clustered around a gravel road. There was a general store, a diner, and a church with a leaning steeple. The locals were friendly but distant, their smiles polite but guarded. At the diner, Mark struck up a conversation with the waitress, a middle-aged woman named Beth. When he mentioned the strange tapping from the night before, her expression shifted. "You're staying at the old Miller cabin, huh?" she said, her voice low. "That place, it's got history." "What kind of history?" Mark asked, intrigued. Beth hesitated, glancing around as if to ensure no one was listening. "Look, I don't know what you heard, but folks around here say that cabin, it's connected to something. People hear things, see things, things that don't make sense." Mark chuckled nervously. "Like ghosts?" Beth didn't smile. "Call it what you want. But if you hear anything strange, don't go looking for answers. Just leave it be." Ignoring Beth's cryptic warning, Mark decided to explore the woods around the cabin that afternoon. The forest was dense, with paths that seemed to twist and turn unpredictably. About a mile in, he stumbled upon something unexpected: an old well, its stones covered in moss and its opening sealed with a rusted iron grate. As Mark approached, a chill ran down his spine. He could have sworn he heard a faint whisper coming from the well, too soft to make out the words. He leaned closer, and the whisper grew louder, more distinct. "Help us." Mark stumbled back, his flashlight dropping to the ground. When he shone the beam at the well again, the whispering stopped. Shaken, he hurried back to the cabin, deciding he'd had enough exploring for one day. That evening, while rummaging through a drawer in the cabin's living room, Mark found an old leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed with age, and the handwriting was messy but legible. It belonged to a man named Daniel Miller, the original owner of the cabin. The entries began innocuously enough, detailing Daniel's life in Hollow Creek. But as Mark read on, the tone grew darker. Daniel wrote about hearing voices at night, seeing shadowy figures in the woods, and finding strange symbols carved into the trees near the cabin. The final entry sent a shiver down Mark's spine. "They come at night. The whispers won't stop. I've sealed the well, but I fear it's not enough. If you're reading this, leave this place. Don't let them in." That night, the tapping returned, louder and more insistent. Mark, now armed with a baseball bat he'd found in the cabin, swung the door open, ready to confront whatever was outside. But the porch was empty. As he stood there, heart pounding, he noticed movement in the woods. A figure, barely visible in the moonlight, stood at the tree line. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just watched. Mark retreated into the cabin, locking the door and bolting the windows. But the sense of being watched didn't fade. He stayed awake until dawn, clutching the bat, every creak of the cabin making his nerves fray further. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Mark returned to the well the next day. Using a crowbar he'd taken from the cabin, he pried open the iron grate. The smell that wafted out was unbearable, and as he shone his flashlight into the darkness, he saw what looked like bones at the bottom. Before he could process what he was seeing, the whispers began again, louder this time. They weren't coming from the well anymore, they were all around him. Mark fled, but the whispers followed, growing into a deafening chorus. By the time he reached the cabin, he was shaking, his mind racing with fear and confusion. The night was the worst yet. The whispers were inside the cabin now, their voices overlapping in an unintelligible cacophony. Shadows moved in the corners of his vision, and the air grew so cold that his breath fogged. Mark barricaded himself in the bedroom, clutching the journal like a talisman. He flipped through its pages, desperate for some clue, some way to make it stop. The final page, which he hadn't noticed before, contained one word scrawled in large, frantic letters: "Run." At dawn, Mark didn't waste a second. He threw his belongings into his car and sped out of Hollow Creek, never looking back. The whispers faded as he left the forest, but the memory of them lingered. Weeks later, back in Seattle, Mark tried to make sense of what had happened. The journal, the well, the whispers, it all felt like a nightmare. But when he searched for Hollow Creek online, he found no record of the village ever existing. To this day, Mark wonders if it was real or if the isolation had driven him mad. But sometimes, in the dead of night, he still hears the whispers. Years later, a hiker in the Appalachian Mountains stumbled upon an abandoned cabin. Inside, he found a leather-bound journal and a chilling sense that he wasn't alone. The whispers had found a new listener.
Thanks for watching and listening. Don't forget to subscribe.